The truth occurs. The truth occurs.
Hi everyone. I'm sure you've heard by now that this week protests have erupted all over Egypt and quickly turned into riots as the Egyptians are attempting to oust their president Hosni Mubarak after nearly 30 years of uninterrupted rule. So there's been some pretty hardcore protesting going on. Even government buildings were set on fire and riot police were called in, but they were unable to get control over the situation. The police opened fire on the crowds and pretty soon the death toll started to rise. The last I heard, at least 100 people had been killed. By Saturday, the army had been called in to replace the police, but some reports that I've seen say that the army is more sympathetic to the protesters than to the government. Now, as for the media angle in general in the Western media, they're always calling the demonstrators anti-government protesters. So putting an anti-anything label on somebody doesn't exactly put a positive spin on it. It kind of gives the impression that they're sort of anarchists, anti-government. Like almost sounds like they're anti-government in general. Our local paper, the Gazette, says vigilantes prowl streets of riot-torn Egypt. Here's a little excerpt from the Gazette article. In normal times, Cairo is a safe city. No neighborhood is off limits to anyone at any time of night, in part thanks to police deployed on every street corner. But now the police presence has evaporated and people oppressed by more than 30 years of draconian emergency laws are having their first whiff of chaotic freedom, and many are losing their inhibitions. Well, if they were free, they wouldn't be rioting because they're starving and oppressed. They make it sound like having police on every corner is a good thing. And see what happens when you lose that police presence and people have a whiff of freedom? They lose their inhibitions. People just are not capable of governing themselves. They're like crazy animals, obviously. Look what happens when they have a whiff of freedom. But in general, there's been a lot of support, from people in the West for the Egyptians. And it wasn't only the Egyptians who've been rising up against their government. The Tunisians did the same thing and managed to oust their leader, Ben Ali. Also in Yemen and in Albania, they've been having similar things going on. And in the West, we've been quite supportive, and I'm sympathetic to them too. At least the Egyptians are brave. Our men in the West have gone a little soft. You know why the Egyptians are doing this? Because they've been sold out and IMF structurally adjusted to death. And they're starving. They're at that point where they know that if they don't stand up now, they're going to die. I guess that's the big difference between the Egyptians and the North Americans, is that the Egyptians realize that they have nothing left to lose. Well, the Egyptians have balls, but unfortunately, the protest movement in Egypt, dictators do not dictate, they obey orders. These, so-called dictators like Mubarak or Ben Ali, they're really just puppets. The protesters are going after the puppets when they should really be focusing on the puppet masters, because they're just going to be replaced otherwise by other puppets. And here's what Professor Chostowski says on the website. In Egypt, just to give you a little history, in Egypt, a devastating IMF program was imposed in 1991 at the height of the Gulf War. It was negotiated in exchange for the annulment of Egypt's multi-billion-dollar military debt to the US, as well as its participation in the war. The resulting deregulation of food prices, sweeping privatization, and massive austerity measures led to the impoverishment of the Egyptian population and the destabilization of its economy. The Mubarak government was praised as a model IMF pupil, because that's how it works. Originally, maybe an economic hitman is sent to a country to get them to get their corrupt leader to sell the country into debt by buying all this infrastructure that they can't afford. And then this, corrupt leader, of course, is richly rewarded for that. And then once they're stuck in so much debt that they can't get out of it, then the IMF will come back in and make them a new deal. And the new deal usually will involve devaluing the currency, privatizing industries, which are, of course, bought by multinationals. Often also wage freezes coupled with price hikes, and they say this is to stabilize the economy, but of course it does the complete opposite. And then they'll also do things like they'll lower their major export commodity price. They'll say it'll make you more competitive. And what ends up happening is no money's coming into the country, nobody has any buying power, food prices going up, and in the end you get a lot of starvation and poverty. And that's what happens in all these countries. And unfortunately they think it's their own dictator or government's fault. They don't realize the mechanics behind it. And the puppet masters support the protest movement against their own puppets. Regime replacement serves to ensure continuity while providing the illusion that meaningful political change has occurred. But as they'll all see, it won't be meaningful because it'll just be another, IMF globalist puppet in there after their leaders are gone. The groups like Kiafa and these others that are using social media to get the protesters together and form this opposition are backed by US-based groups. Gives a couple of examples. Kiafa is supported by US-based International Center for Nonviolent Conflict, and Freedom House was involved in promoting and training Middle East and North African Facebook and Twitter blogs, and explains here that the Freedom House Fellows benefit from networking opportunity through interaction with Washington-based donors, international organizations, and the media, and that Freedom House hosted 11 bloggers from the Middle East and North Africa during a study tour in Washington, D.C. And while they were there, the fellows also participated in a Senate briefing and met with high-level officials at USAID. That's the people who bring the GMOs to the other countries as, help. Officials at USAID, State Department, and Congress, as well as international media, including Al Jazeera and the Washington Post. And as for the Muslim Brotherhood, it says here that the Brotherhood is not seen as any kind of direct threat to Washington's interests in the region, and that actually Western intelligence agencies have a long-standing history of collaboration with the Brotherhood, and there are also covert links between the Brotherhood and the CIA. So the opposition is getting their funding and training from the US, the same US that puts their dictators into power with the help of the other globalists. So what do you think is going to happen? They can oust their puppet. They're going to get a new one. So well, it's good that they have a lot of balls, but unfortunately, I think unless they start to get the big picture, things aren't really going to change. Well, thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time.